Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. A very warm welcome to this Monday, 2nd January 2023 morning Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam discussion. Today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, entitled The Cosmic Manifestation, Chapter 5, entitled The Cause of All Causes, text 32. Before we discuss on this verse, let's sing Jai Radha Madhav. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Gopijana Vallabha Girivara Dhari, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Shri Radhe, Jai Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Shri Radhe, Jai Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Nitai Sachinandana Gaura Hari, Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajakacarya Shodra Shadarshi Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्री वासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय. श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय. वृंदावन धाम की जय. मथुरा धाम की जय. जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय. गंगा माई की जय. यमुना माई की जय. तुलसी देवी की जय. भक्ति देवी की जय. सामवेद भक्तवृंद की जय. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine. Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamastu Krishne Matirastu. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, Text 32. Yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe śekur brahma-vittama. Yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe śekur brahma-vittama. Yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe śekur brahma-vittama. Word by word, yada, as long as, ete, all these, asaṅgatā, without being assembled, bhāvā, remained so situated, bhuta, elements, indriya, senses, manah, mind, guṇāḥ, modes of nature, yada, so long, ayatana, the body, nirmāṇe, in being formed, na śekuh, was not possible, brahma-vittama, O Nārada, the best knower of transcendental knowledge. Translation: O Nārada, best of the transcendentalists, the forms of the body cannot take place as long as these created parts, namely the elements, senses, mind, and modes of nature, are not assembled. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. The different types of bodily construction of the living entities are exactly like different types of motor cars manufactured by assembling the allied motor parts. When the car is ready, the driver sits in the car and moves it as he desires. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 18.61. The living entity is as if seated on the machine of the body, and the car of the body is moving by the control of the material nature. Just as the railway trains are moving under the direction of the controller. The living entities, however, are not the bodies. They are separate from the cars of the body. But the less intelligent material scientist cannot understand the process of assembling the parts of the body, namely the senses, the mind, and the qualities of the material modes. Every living entity is a spiritual spark, part and parcel of the Supreme Being, and by the kindness of the Lord, for the Father is kind to his sons, the individual living beings are given a little freedom to act according to their will, to lord it over the material nature. Just as a father gives some playthings to the crying child to satisfy him, the whole material creation is made possible by the will of the Lord to allow the bewildered living entities to lord it over things as they desire. although under the control of the agent of the Lord. The living entities are exactly like small children playing the material field under the control of the maidservant of the Lord, nature. They accept the Maya or the maidservant as all in all and thus wrongly conceive the supreme truth to be feminine, goddess Durga, etc. The foolish childlike materialist cannot reach beyond the conception of the maidservant, material nature, but the intelligent grown up sons of the Lord know well that all the acts of material nature are controlled by the Lord, just as a maidservant is under the control of the master, the father of the undeveloped children. The parts of the body, such as the senses, are the creation of the Mahat Tattva, and when they are assembled by the will of the Lord, the material body comes into existence, and the living entity is allowed to use it for further activities. This is explained as follows. Before we discuss on this verse, let us offer some prayers. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namashreshtham Manamapi Shachiputram Matra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Murupurim Mathurim Goshthavati Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Adadandastranam Dante Idam Yachaha Punaha Punaha Shriman Rupa Padambhojam Dhulisyam Janma Janmani He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, Text 32. Yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe na śekur brahma-vittama. O Nārada, best of the transcendentalists, the forms of the body cannot take place as long as these created parts, namely the elements, senses, mind, and modes of nature, are not assembled. So in this verse, we see that Brahmaji is answering the questions of his Manasaputra, the mind-born son, Nārada Muni. And this discussion is taking place between the pure devotees of the Lord, Brahmaji and Nārada Muni. So we see that there are 12 Mahajans. It is mentioned, Mahajano yena gatahasa pantha. So, Tarko pratishtat shrutayo vibhinna, nasha vrishir yasya matam na bhinnam, dharmasya tattvam vihitam guhayam, Mahajano yena gatahasa pantha. Here the discussion is happening between two Mahajanas of the Lord, two great devotees of the Lord. And this, what we have discussed about the particular verse, Tarko apratishtat shrutayo vibhinna. So if we want to understand the spiritual knowledge, and if we try to understand the spiritual knowledge through pure logic and through uh, through logical discussions between two highly intellectual people, it is not helping us to go in the direction of devotional service. Tarko apratishtat. So if there is tarka and vitarka in this in the scriptures and in the Sanskrit language, it is said tarka and vitarka. Tarka is someone is arguing from one perspective, and vitarka is someone is arguing from another perspective, the opposite perspective. So if people are arguing with each other, tarko, one cannot know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tarko apratishtat shrutayo vibhinna. So one can hear from lot of different sources. Many sources one can hear. Nasha rishir yasya matam na bhinnam. So the rishis are called rishis because they have to have their own specific perspective to everything. One rishi's perspective will differ from another rishi's perspective. So it is like tarko apratishtat. Nasha rishir yasya matam na bhinnam. Dharmasya tattvam nihitam guhayam. So the third line of that verse, it says that the actual crux, the actual conclusion of engaging in religious principles is deep in the recesses of the hearts of these people. Who are these people? Mahajana. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. The people who are totally surrendered on to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When one is na sadhyati mam yogo, na sankhya dharma uddhava, na swadhyayas tapastyago, yato bhaktir mamorjita. Krishna mentions Uddhava in Uddhava Gita that that no one can understand me by self-study. Na sadhyati mam yogo, nor through yoga, na sankhya, nor through the sankhya philosophy, na dharma, nor through execution of religious duties, na swadhyayas tapa, nor through austerity, nor through renunciation, tyaga. Then how can one understand Supreme Personality of Godhead? Yato bhaktir mamorjita. When there is loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can be understood. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvada tato mam tatvato gyatva vishate tadanantaram. Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that through loving devotional service, you can know me. Bhaktya tva ananya shakya hameva vido arjuna. Gyatam drishtam cha tatvena praveshtam cha parantapa. So this is it is the loving devotional service, and this loving devotional service are shown by the great devotees of the Lord who are called Mahajanas. And the 12 Mahajanas are Swayambhu Nārada Shambhu, Kumara Kapilo Manu, Prahalado Janako Bhishmo Balir Vayya Sakir Vayam. So this is, that particular verse is said by Yamaraj, who is the Lord of Death. He is doing a service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead by being the Lord of Death, which is a very difficult service to do, because no living entity wants to die. So there is this beautiful incident that happens when the Pandavas are in the forest incognito, and then they are in a lake, and then there is a yaksha who is actually Yamaraj himself. So he's testing the Pandavas. And then each of the Pandavas come. They do not understand that this yaksha is a great personality, and they are not answering the questions. And then they die. And then finally Yudhishthira comes, and Yudhishthira actually understands that this is a great personality, and I should answer his questions to the best of my abilities. And one of the questions that Yamaraja asks to Yudhishthira is, "What is the most wonderful thing in this universe?" Then Maharaj Yudhishthira replies that ahani bhutani gachanti yamalayam sheshas thavaram ichanti atascharya kimparam. Yudhishthira Maharaj says that at every moment some person or the other is gachanti yamalayam, are leaving their body, are dying at every moment. Sheshas thavaram ichanti atascharya kimparam. But whoever is alive wants to be with that thought process that I will always be alive, I will never die, or my death should never come. So this is, unfortunately, this is the conditioned state of existence. Why there is this conditioned state of existence? Because one thinks that I am this body, I'm this subtle, I'm this gross body, and I'm this subtle mind. So this is pumsastri mithuni bhava metam tayor mitho hridaya granthiyaho ato grha kshetra sutapta vittar janasya mohoyam aham mameti. So this is the unfortunate situation in this material world, where immediately when we are taking birth, immediately there is attachment to the material body. Immediate. So that is ignorance. So the ignorance is the lack of knowledge. That is what ignorance is. In a very simple sense, ignorance is lack of knowledge. And what is knowledge? Adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam. Etad jnanam iti proktam yadato ajnanam anyatha. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita what is real knowledge and what is ignorance. The real knowledge is adhyatma jnana nityatvam. Adhyatma. So when we are understanding our original constitutional position, that is real knowledge. Tattva jnanartha darshanam. When we are having that vision to understand our transcendental position as eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, Mama eva amsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanātana. Manaha shashtani indriyani prakritistani karshati. So Krishna very clearly mentions in Bhagavad Gita that each and every living entity in this whole universe are my eternal part and parcels. Eternal. So what does that mean? At no point in time we are separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We are always in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So why we do not realize that we are in connection with Supreme Personality of Godhead? Because there is ignorance. This ignorance is, what is this ignorance? Ignorance is this imprint of our since time immemorial. We do not know when this began, but since time immemorial, the living entity has been in ignorance, unfortunately. It is, and that being in ignorance is something that has been independently chosen by the living entity. It is not that someone is forcing the living entity to become ignorant. This is the wonderful nature of this material creation, that everyone is independent. Independent in the sense that one can choose the path that one wants to go in. No one is stopping one from choosing. If one wants to go in a cycle of negativity, one can go in that path. If one wants to go in the cycle of positivity, one can go in that path also. So this is the one. And what is the reason one chooses a path of negative cycle or a positive cycle? What is the reason? It is the constant imprints of activities that have been done since time immemorial. Therefore Krishna says this, that bahunam janmanamante jnanvan mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. After many births, bahunam janmanamante, after many births, taking births, ante, when it ends, who surrenders unto me? A person in knowledge. What is that knowledge? The knowledge is the understanding that I am eternally connected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I can access that connection at any moment if I focus on that connection, if I understand that I am connected. That is yoga. What is yoga? Means connection. So Krishna mentions the whole Bhagavad Gita is about yoga. There are different types of yoga that Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita. Karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga. So what is one actually doing? One is regaining the lost connection. And the connection is actually, in the real sense, the connection is not lost. But it is the ignorance which is hiding that connection. And when we are engaged in this cheto darpana marjanam, bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam, shreya kairva chandrika vitaranam, vidyavadu jivanam, anandambudhi vardhanam, pratipadam purnamrita swadanam, sarvatma snapanam param vijayate Shri Krishna sankirtanam. So when we are engaging in this chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This transcendental sound vibration, which is directly coming, which is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The cleansing is happening. The cleansing of that ignorance is happening. So the mind has got covered with the dust of ignorance, and because of that, we are not able to see ourselves clearly, who we really are. Who are we? We are eternal part and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But when there is this covering of the dust in the mind, which is of the ignorance, we are not able to see ourselves clearly. So therefore, immediately we identify with the mind and the five senses. Manaha shashtani indriyani. And then what happens? Prakriti sthani karshati. In this material universe, one is in a mode of struggle, constant struggle. The struggle is based on ignorance. If there is knowledge, there is no struggle, because one knows that all this is temporary. So mamupetya punarjanmam dukkhalayam ashashvatam napnuvanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramam gata. So again, Krishna mentions the word mahatmana there, the great souls. So this is a discussion between the two great souls, two mahajanas, the great personalities. So we were discussing about who are the 12 great personalities. It starts with Swayambhu, who is Brahmaji. Then there is Nārada. So these first two personalities who are mentioned in that verse are discussing this. So such a transcendental chapter this is. And in the Canto itself, the two great devotees of the Lord are discussing about how the living entity is coming into existence, how the material universe is coming into existence. So when we understand this, we know why we are in this universe and what is the cause of all these distresses that we experience in the material world. Therefore, Krishna says, as we mentioned, dukkhalayam ashashvatam. So this material world, it's called an abode of sorrow, and it is temporary. And that is the wonderful. So if someone says that you're being pessimistic, you're saying that this is an abode of sorrow, immediately the next word is ashashvatam. It is temporary. So whatever this material world of sorrow is, it is temporary. It is not permanent. So what is permanent? Permanent is this bliss that we are actually made up of. Ramante yogina anante satyanande chidatmani iti rama padenasha param brahma vidiyate. As it is mentioned in the scriptures, the permanent experience is that of bliss, because we are composed of Sachidananda. As Krishna is mentioned, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So this is what is mentioned by, again, Lord Brahmaji says in Brahma Samhita. He says that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Paramaha, Ishvaraha Paramaha. So Srila Prabhupada actually mentions that the living entities probably can call themselves Ishvara, controllers, because they are controlling some small parts. And it is actually that controlling small parts is actually the control element is coming in thought process because of ignorance. Actually, living entity does not control anything, because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the controller of everyone. So the real controller and the only controller is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There is no other controllers. Everyone else is Jivere Swarupaya Krishnera Nitya Das. So everyone else is eternally a servant of the Lord. And Srila Prabhupada actually mentions in the purport as well, in this purport, how Srishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Reka Chayeva Yasya Bhunani Bibharti Durga Ichhanurupam Apicha Cheshtate Sa Govinda Madi Purusham Tamham Bhajami. As it is mentioned in Brahma Samhita, that goddess Durga is on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. She's doing the Srishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Reka. She is involved in this creation of the material universe, the maintenance of the material universe, and the destruction of the material universe. Srishti Sthiti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Reka. Chayeva Yasya Bhunani Bibharti Durga. So she is Chaya, shadow. So in the sense that she's the energy of the energetic person. So Krishna has got the material energy and the spiritual energy. So the material energy is controlling the material universes, and the spiritual energy is controlling the spiritual universes. So here, the material energy, she's called Durga. So Durga means fort, and Durga is a goddess who is controlling that fort. And in that fort, so Srila Prabhupada actually mentions in the purport as well. In this purport, he mentions that just like a child, when they force to do something, the parents finally agree. The father finally agrees. Similarly, the living entity wants to lord it over the material nature, which is not their original nature. Their original nature is to render loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to be in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and to engage in His service. That is the natural propensity of all the living entities. But if they are not engaged in their natural propensity, they unfortunately are in the artificial situation. And this artificial situation is one is thinking that this janasya mohoyam aham mameti, mitho hridaya granthi rahul. So then one is thinking that I am this body and everything related to this body is mine. When that thinking is there, then one cannot understand what is devotional service. Because Sri Nārada Muni again gives very clear definition of what is devotional service. So Sri Nārada Muni says that sarva upadhi vinirmuktam tat paratvena nirmalam. So he says that when one gives up all the designations, then one realizes one's pure nature. So until and unless we think that I am Indian or I am Irish or I am American or I am British, that is nationalities. What is this nationality based on? Being born in a particular country, or if someone goes to another country and takes the citizenship of another country, nationalities are based on all these different aspects which are related to the body. So until the point one is thinking that I am this and that, in terms of the bodily designations that one has, unfortunately the spiritual or the devotional service cannot begin. The real devotional service begins when one takes off all these designations. Sarva upadhi vinirmuktam. When one takes off, then one realizes that, oh, brahma-bhūta prasannātma na shochati yakāṅkṣati samas sarveshu bhūteshu madbhaktim labhate para. So that is the brahma-bhūta stage. When I take off all my designations, naham vipro nacha narapatir napi vaishyo na shudro naham varni nacha grahapatir napi gopi bhartur pada kamaleor dasa dasanudas. So this is what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. So I'm not a brahmana, I'm not a kshatriya, I'm not a shudra, I'm not a vaishya, I'm not a grahastha, I'm not a brahmachari, I'm not a vanaprastha, I'm not a sannyasi. I'm none of these. So who am I? I'm gopi bhartur pada kamaleor dasa dasanudas. I am the servant of the servant of the servant of the person who is the maintainer of the gopis. So that is Krishna. So servant of the servant of the servant. Mad janma phalavidham madhukaita bare mad prarthaniya mad anugraha esha eva tvad bhritya bhritya paricharaka bhritya bhritya bhrityasya bhritya iti mam smara lokanatha. So this is said by Kulashekar Alvar in the Mukunda Mala Stotra. So he actually goes down seven down the line in terms of being the servant of the servant of the servant, 7 times. Bhritya bhritya paricharaka bhritya bhritya bhrityasya bhritya iti mam smara lokanatha. So that's it's 7 times down the line. So this is the wonderful situation of the pure devotees of the Lord, like Kulashekara Alvar, or if we take Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna himself, who came in the form of Radha Bhava Dviti Suvalitam Naumi Krishna Swarupam. So he is Krishna himself, but he has come in the form and in the mood of his topmost devotee, Srimati Radharani. So these are the wonderful, the way the Supreme Personality of Godhead is helping the living entities to come back to him is just unimaginable. It is, there are so many ways. Parivadato yatho yatha tathava nanu mukharo vadati vayam na vicharayama hari rasa madira madati matta bhuvi vilutama natama nirvisham. These are the wonderful devotees that Srila Prabhupada created through his transcendental potency, coming directly as a Shakti-avesha avatar, the directly empowered incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has created this wonderful international society for Krishna consciousness, where there is these sincere devotees who are in that state of mind where they are Hari Rasa Madira Madati Matta Bhuvi Vilutama Natama Nirvisham. So we have just come into this new year, 2023, and unfortunately, in the conditioned material existence, the welcome of the new year is done through intoxication, unfortunately, because that is considered to be a great source of happiness, which everyone knows that it is actually not. But somehow or other, the society has gone in that direction, which is actually the kaler dosha nidhe rajan hi asti eko mahad gunan kirtana deva krishnasya mukta sangha param braje. Krishna, it is actually mentioned by Srila Shukadeva Goswami himself that in this age of Kali, he says that it is full of dosha, impurities, unfortunately. And we actually see that on a daily basis, that something that is not helpful for the living entity is considered as something that is the most, that creates most happiness. So if you have people who want to celebrate, they think that the best way to celebrate is by getting intoxicated. It's unfortunate. So that is the unfortunate situation in this material world. So here, Srila Prabhupada has created this wonderful international society for Krishna consciousness, where the wonderful devotees of the Lord get intoxicated by drinking the nectar of the holy name, Hari Rasa Madira. So it is the intoxication of the holy names of the Lord. So when one is getting intoxicated by the holy names of the Lord, one is, if someone is looking at a person who is totally intoxicated, and if someone is looking at a person who is totally intoxicated by the holy name of the Lord, the symptoms might be the same. So someone is intoxicated through the material alcohol or things like that, has totally lost control of themselves. The person who is intoxicated with the holy names of the Lord also has lost control, but their loss of control brings in auspiciousness in the whole world. Bhuvi grinanti ye bhuridajana tava kathamritam tapta jivanam kavibhiriditam kalmashapaham shravana mangalam Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam bhuvi grinanti ye bhuridajana. That brings all auspiciousness to this whole universe when one gets intoxicated by the holy names of the Lord, and that intoxication spreads everywhere. It becomes vigata kuntha. There is no longer anxiety in this. This material world is called. It is full of kuntha. Kuntha is anxiety, and the spiritual world is vigata kuntha. That's why it is called Vaikuntha, without any anxiety. Why there is no anxiety in the spiritual world? Because one knows one's eternal position as an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When one knows that there is no janma mrityu jara vyadhi. There is no birth. Because there is no birth, there is no death. Because there is no birth and death, there is no old age and disease. So these four basic. This is the punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatare shayanam. As Srila Shankaracharya says in Bhaja Govinda, he says that the major difficulty of this material world is that one is constantly taking birth and one is constantly dying. One is constantly in the wombs of different mothers, different ways. Sometimes whatever e rupe brahmanda brahmite kono bhagyavan jeev. So brahmanda brahmite. And here this particular verse is very clearly stating, if we look at the four lines, yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe na śekur brahma-vittama. So if you look at the first and the second lines, yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ. So the subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and false ego, is storing all the impressions. Each and every moment's impressions is getting stored in the subtle body. And since time immemorial, these impressions are being constantly stored. And that is causing the living entity to take a particular birth. In the next, after this body is given up, how is the next body taken up? Basing on what the impressions are there in the subtle body, the next body is being taken up. So Krishna actually mentions in Bhagavad Gita that whatever antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yam vapi smaram bhavam styajichi ante kalevaram tam ivaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita yam vati smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram. So at the time of death, whatever one's most prominent thought is, one actually becomes that in the next life. And how does that prominent thought come at the time of death? Based on whatever was the most prominent thought when one was living the life. So that is what Krishna is saying. Yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram tam ivaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita. Because during the whole life, one was in that particular frame of mind. The same frame of mind comes at the time of death. And when that frame of mind comes at the time of death, next body is coming in as whatever that frame of mind was. Therefore, it is a consequently we are putting the impressions on our subtle body, depending on our actions, depending on our focus, where our mind is focused. We are constantly keeping some kind of imprints on our subtle body. Constant, at every moment there is an imprint. And therefore it is really important where our focus is, where our mind is. So if the mind is not fixed on the Lord at every moment, if it is possible, if it is not possible, then whatever activities, yat karoshi yadashnasi yat juhoshi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam, as Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that if we are doing it with an attitude of giving it as a service to the Lord, whatever activities we are doing. Yagya artha karmana anyatra lokoyam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. So Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that Yagya Purusha, who is the Yagya Purusha, is Lord Vishnu, Krishna. So when the work is done as an offering to Yagya Purusha, Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna, then there is no karma bandhana. Why is there this constant cycle of birth and death? It is because there is karma bandhana. What is karma bandhana? It means that I am doing some activity and I am expecting back something in return. That is karma bandhana. So I'm doing some pious activities, and then I'm doing pious activities so that I get some pious credits back. And similarly, sometimes like what the situation Arjuna was in. So he was seemingly in a situation where he would generate impious credits. So because I'm afraid of doing my real duty, because it is generating impious credit, I'm not going to do my real duty. So Arjuna was in that situation, and then Krishna said that this is your duty. So yeah, you're a kshatriya. So your duty is to protect kshat trayate. Kshatriya means one who protects the others from being, in terms of unfair. If someone is unfairly taking advantage of another person, the Kshatriya should come in there and say to the person who is taking the advantage that you should not be doing this. So here we see when we look at the Kurukshetra war, the Mahabharata, the war, there was this lot of atrocities was being done by Duryodhana, unfortunately. So he was committing a lot of atrocities to the people, to the simple people, and therefore, as a Kshatriya dharma, it was his duty as a Kshatriya, as a person who should stop the irreligiosity to prosper in the world. He had to stop Arjuna. That was Arjuna's duty. So this is the important thing here. So if we are attached to the body, then we are attached to the pleasures of the body, the senses, coming in touch with the sense objects. So we are attached to that, and because we are attached to that, we are working with, or we are doing any kind of even charity or whatever. We are doing it with the motive that my sense gratification will become better. Or if someone is understanding that they have afterlife, they are actually doing those activities with that thought process that I will get a better life. I will get a life in the heavenly planets, and I can enjoy for millions and millions of years. But Abrahma Bhonaloka Punaravartina Arjuna. Mamupeti tu Kanteya Punarjanmana Vidyate. So even until the point of the Brahmaloka, which is here Lord Brahma and Nārada are discussing with each other. So until to the point of Brahmaloka, Punaravartino Arjuna, Krishna mentions that this cycle of birth and death is constant. So unless and until one realizes that this cycle of birth and death is the main cause of all the other suffering, one can never engage in the loving devotional service of the Lord. So that realization is extremely important. Why is it that we are in this material world? And here it is very clearly explained why the living entity is in material world. This chapter is very beautifully explaining that. And in the Kapila Muni's discussion as well, it says, Karmana Daiva Netrena Jantur Deha Upapatti Striya Pravishta Udaram Pumsa Reta Kanashraya. So this is all the activities are being done under the supervision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the supervision does not mean, if we actually understand the supervision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then we'll come out of the cycle of birth and death immediately. But if we are ignoring sometimes there is ignoring the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as well. So that is really a very difficult position to be in. And that is ignorance. If you're ignoring the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is real ignorance. What is knowledge? Knowledge is acknowledging the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is knowledge. Ignorance is ignoring the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when we recognize that there is Supreme Personality of Godhead, then we understand that we are his eternal part and parcels. And when we understand we are his eternal part and parcels, the only thing that we want to do is engage in his service. We do not want to do anything else. Aham sarvasya prabho matta sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhāvā samanvita. So when one understands that everything is Lord's, so we are not doing anything great when we are offering something to the Lord, because anyway it is his. This is very beautifully. I think we have discussed this in previous classes as well. And here Srila Prabhupada has given the example of a child as well. So a child is making some drawing, for example. They're using the paper that the parent has given. They're using the color that the parent has given. They're using everything that the parent has given. But they make that whatever drawing that they make. and then they gave it to the parent. How satisfied the parent would be with that attitude of the child. There is no means. There is no. You cannot measure that satisfaction of the parent. It's just immeasurable. That is exactly what the Lord, what the living entities can do. So whatever the Lord says, you just say that, Lord, this is yours. It was always yours. I'm just becoming a medium to seemingly give it back to you, because it does not need to be given back to him as well. Therefore, Krishna says, Patram pushpam phalam toyam yume bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhakti upaharatam ashrami prayadatma. The most important thing there is bhakti upaharatam. If that feeling of connection with the Lord, that, oh Lord, this is yours, I am yours. If that is there, then that is the beginning of the end of the cycle of birth and death. So here Srila Prabhupada actually mentions that Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati brahman sarva bhutani yantra rudhani maya. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is present in the heart of all the living entities, and basing on what the living entity's thoughts are, they are getting a type of that type of vehicle to engage their thoughts in. If someone is really interested in eating meat, for example, just an example, constantly they're thinking of meat. The best body to constantly consume meat is that of a lion or a tiger. So, unfortunately, that at the end of at the time of death, is actually thinking of that meat, and the best body to get to eat meat is that of lion. So one can become a lion or tiger. And this is unfortunately in the sense of the conditioned living entity, the state. It is such an unfortunate state that one immediately identifies oneself. One takes birth and immediately one identifies that I am this. And what is needed is when this transcendental discussions, when we are doing, then we understand that this external is just temporary. It is there for, again, that we have discussed this before. There is a word called kshana bhangur in the Sanskrit world. Kshana bhangur means one that is existing only for a moment. It's like a momentary. If you look at the one particular life, and if you look at eternity has no beginning, no end. So one particular life is like a just, it's come and it's gone. We don't even know when it is gone, if we compare the eternity with the lives. So therefore, this transcendental knowledge is extremely important when we understand, as Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport here. He says every living entity is a spiritual spark, part and parcel of the Supreme Being. And by the kindness of the Lord, for the Father is kind to his sons, the individual living beings are given a little freedom to act according to their will, to lord it over the material nature. And this is again a great mercy, costless mercy of the Lord, that the freedom is little. If the freedom was total, unfortunately, one might create a situation where one will never go back to Godhead. So that is a costless mercy of the Lord, that the freedom is little freedom. But then the little freedom is there so that one can decide what is the best path for oneself. So if the Lord wanted, he could have totally forcefully controlled all the living entities. But when there is force, there is no love. The real love is when, so there is this beautiful saying which says that when you love someone, set them free. If they come back to you, you know that they are yours. So this is what the situation here is, the wonderful situation. Just as a father gives playthings to the crying child to satisfy him, The whole material creation is made possible by the will of the Lord to allow the bewildered living entities to lord it over things as they desire, although under the control of the agent of the Lord. The living entities are exactly like small children playing the material field under the control of the maidservant of the Lord, nature. Maya dakshena prakritim suyate sacharachara. Hetu nanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. As Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, that under my direction, this material, wonderful material direction, creation is taking place constantly. So they accept the Maya or the maidservant as all in all, and thus wrongly conceive the Supreme to be Goddess Yoga, etc. The foolish childlike materialists cannot reach beyond the conception of the maidservant, material nature, but the intelligent grown-up sons of the Lord know well that all the acts of material nature are controlled by the Lord. Just as a maidservant is under the control of the master, the father of the undeveloped children. So this is very beautifully explained in the purport by Srila Prabhupada. How, so that is the Buddha, the intelligent person. When a person is intelligent, when a person is using the intelligence in the right way, one fully knows that all this is temporary. And when knows that this is temporary, then one tries to understand what is permanent then. If all of this, because at every moment the cells are changing. The cells, even though we notice it after many years, but every moment the change is happening. Everyone knows, the science knows this. So that means there is a constant change happening in the material universe. So who is witnessing that change? If I'm constantly knowing that there is change, who is it that is knowing that this change is happening? That is us. That is the eternal self. The eternal self knows that all this change is constantly happening. And this eternal self is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and eternally engaged in the loving devotional service of the Lord. Eternally. So what has to be done? What has to be done is to take off the ignorance. Preme bhakti yaha hoite, avidya vinashayate. So as it is mentioned in the Guru Vandana prayer, when we are engaged in this loving devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the avidya is getting destroyed. The ignorance is getting destroyed. And when the ignorance gets destroyed, then we know. So it's again a cycle which is in the right direction. So we could go in the cycle which is in the wrong direction, which is causing us to constantly be in the cycle, repeated cycle of birth and death. Or we can go in the cycle which is in the right direction. And this cycle is helping us to understand our real nature, which is totally free from all these inebrities that we experience in this material world. This material world has got, even if one has got, one is the richest person in the world, the richest person in the world cannot say that I do not have any troubles. Yes. Ironically, the richest person might have more troubles because they are in a situation where they want to protect their place. So it is a very, so even to get something, one has to put in a lot of effort, and when one gets that, to maintain it, one has to put extra effort. So constantly there is this effort, and all this is unfortunately based on ignorance. Of course, there could be a person who are seemingly in a opulent place, but they are not attached to it, and that is wonderful. So anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjata nirbandha krishna sambandha yukta vairagyam uchyate. So without being attached, one is using the things as they have to be used, but without any attachment, without any grasping or craving to things. It is actually the grasping and craving and the imprints of that grasping and craving that actually causes the living entity to keep taking birth after birth after birth after birth. If there no grasping and craving, one actually knows that everything is Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincham jagatyam jagat. Tena tyaktena bhunjita magrita kasya svidham. When one knows that fully, then even one might be in so-called opulent conditions, or one might actually be in a not so opulent condition. It does not matter literally, because there's no attachment. The whole thing, this whole concept of birth and death and rebirth and everything is happening because of attachment. And why is attachment happening? Because there is ignorance. So, and how can ignorance, how can we take away ignorance? We can do that, take away ignorance by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So if we just get absorbed in that transcendental sound vibrations of the Lord, then we are in the spiritual world. And there is no anxiety because we are in touch with our original nature, which is totally Satchidananda. So existence, knowledge, and bliss. It is truth. So that is our original nature, because we are eternal part and parcels of the Lord, and we can understand our original nature when we focus our minds on Krishna. Man mana bhava mad bhakta madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishesi satyam te pratijani priyasine. So with this, we can end this discussion, this beautiful prayer. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishesi satyam te pratijani priyasine. As Krishna mentions, that Krishna says that give your mind to me, become my devotee, offer your obeisances and worship to me. You'll surely come back to me, Arjuna. Satyam te, this is the truth. And why I'm telling this to you? Because you are very dear to me, Arjuna. Pratijani priyosine. So with this, we end this verse, which is yadaite saṅgatā bhāvā bhūtendriya-mano-guṇāḥ yadāyatana-nirmāṇe na śekur brahma-vittama. O Nārada, best of the transcendentalists, the forms of the body cannot take place as long as these created parts, namely the elements, senses, mind, and modes of nature, are not assembled. So when all those, so basically what is happening is the imprints are there since from the previous births, and that imprints, when the things are assembled, when the senses and everything else is assembled, the imprints are going into that particular body as a seed. And then the person is taking birth, and again those imprints are getting manifested in that birth. And therefore these imprints are extremely important. What kind of focus and what kind of thoughts and what kind of activities are we engaged in? That is extremely important. So if we are engaged in devotional service now, and we are focusing on devotional service, the mind will have devotional service at the time of death, and therefore the body that we get after death will continue us in that direction of devotional service. And finally, we'll reach a birth where we are in a state of total surrender onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then one comes out of this cycle of birth and death and goes back home, back to Godhead. With that, I would like to thank everyone for being part of this discussion. Let me just have a look if there's any comments that I see here. Okay, Lakshman Rao, Hare Krishna, thank you very much. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Budale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshitarne Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamastu Krishna Matirastu Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.